imagining his position being so fucking difficult that he no longer can participate.
Right.
And he's like decided to no longer be a participant. And I love that kind of escapist kind of mentality, that kind of rejection. I mean, you see it in Dick Gregory. I mean, like, you see it in comedy consistently. This kind of going inside of a situation and then you know, rejecting it and then projecting onto it. I mean, it was the success of Chappelle Show. I mean, it's like that mentality, that kind of lost mentality. I mean, it leads to a piece like this, Neurosis, where you just, I mean, it's like absurd, right? Like you take the idea of neurosis. Neurosis is for smart people. Like neurosis is this, like, to be neurotic is this perception. It's like, oh, he's neurotic.
Yeah,
he's very smart. He's neurotic.
The thing is, you can reverse that because I think it's White Man Can't Jump where they're in the car and Jimi Hendrix is on. And it's like,
you listen to Jimmy?
It's like, well, you hear Jimmy, but you listen to him, you can't hear him.
And that's fascinating. I mean, it's like the same thing with Ornette Coleman. I mean, it's like, you know, who didn't, you know,
but it's not, that's amazing.
Black people weren't listening to Eric Dolphy. I mean, it was like... But
the accessibility thing, it's like, yes, you listen to Jimi Hendrix, but you can't hear
Jimi Hendrix.
But also, White Man Can't Jump, right? So there's this sort of multiple exclusion. And then what you find is that these are kinds of knowledges. They're embodied forms and lived forms, and they amount to a kind of metaphysics.
No, absolutely. But to take your Sanaa example, I mean, I think it's really important to also understand there's a tremendous amount of sincerity, I think. And that's something that I think cannot be overlooked, is how much he genuinely believed that there was no other option other than to kind of make up this place. And I think that's the tricky part is from being informed and being familiar with your kind of production of this fiction, but to actually then subscribe to that production and believe it in the most sincere way and not to kind of let it go. And I think that what I often try to do, and for however tricky someone may perceive you know, aspects of it, I hope that's not the case, I do this with all sincerity. I mean, this is unapologetically sincere, and I mean, in the case of the film, I mean, we're starting to border on serious romance. You know? Like, you know, it's looking at Gordon Parks' photographs from the 70s. I mean, like, you know, it's like becomes really this kind of opportunity, right, to reject tragedy, but to still be familiar with it. There's something tragic that kind of exists in my approach to the materials, but it's not exclusively tragic. And it's not exclusively romantic. And I think that those kind of contradictions and those moments and those marriages and that, like, kind of, I like to use the word miscegenation because I think it's really fucked up. And I think it starts to take us down different, you know, paths. But I think that that's really what separates work that is successful more often than not. That is aware of itself, and work that's not successful, that's aware of itself. Maybe we should take questions?
Is it a good time for questions? We'll open it up to questions. You know, okay.
So, I mean, when I hear you talk, I hear this sort of black versus blacklist dialogue, and you being aware of the dialogue that other people are going to have of you in these sort of class or classless situations of poor, middle class, rich, where you stand, is anybody even noticing that there's a difference? Now, when you go home at the end of the day, are you ever thinking, God, I wish people could just get over that, and what I'd really like to talk about is, I mean, it sounds like I would be incredibly tired by that dialogue coming from where you are. Like, is there something else you'd rather be talking about?
No, absolutely not. Because I think that you need to be involved in the conversation that's happening, you know, clearly around you now. There's always a sense that people imagine that I'm disappointed by, you know, these conditions. I'm not. I don't. Jordan Hurston wrote an essay once that I'd like to reference quite a bit, and it actually shows up in the work, but yeah, it's called Sharpening My Oyster Knife. And she says, I'm not tragically black. She's like, don't worry about me. I'm too busy sharpening my oyster knife. Now, two things. One, you don't sharpen oyster knives. So either she's not been sharpening an oyster knife, or she's started to think about potentially using it as a weapon. And I'm not interested in being a tragic character. I'm doing well. I'm showing Hauser Wirth coming up.
I also think there's an implication in that. I'm not saying you're implying this, but often this idea is implied that somehow black life, black social life, black experience is so limited or so narrow that to be constrained to representing or being interested
right,
in
it's a ghetto space in itself, which I don't see that way.
I think that's sort of underlying this push towards like, wow, why don't you
why don't they let him talk about other things that white people like to talk about?
Right.
It's like they won't let him do it. They keep him in the ghetto. He's talking about the ghetto thing. It's like, no, these are not. That's not the condition.
Right.
Of
So
the work.
this is not a constraint.
Right. It's not a constraint, and it's a flowering pasture of opportunity to have conversations, and conversations both in and out of it. And so I see where you're coming from, but no, I'm not.
Also, I think that I think you've left really interesting hints. I'm thinking of a piece. I apologize for talking about a piece that you don't get to see, but we can describe it. Threeness.
Right.
If you want to describe that piece, which I think kind of talks about multiplicity and this ability to kind of talk about these things without talking about a singular constraint idea. Maybe you want to talk about that just for a second.
Well, I mean,
just a piece, just describe it. I think.
The piece is. I think you're talking about a work with Al Green on the cover, right?
No, the video.
Oh, the video Freeness, yeah. With you saw that?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. No one has really not.
No one has seen it.
No one cares. It is an unloved artwork. It is an unloved
I
work.
think it's pretty important.
But with the lights flashing and
And the mirror.
it was.
Or maybe not.
I love that work. I think it's. I mean, the title really comes from the W.B. Du Bois talking about the idea of double consciousness, and I started thinking about kind of more of a multi-conscious location. It's not just I'm black and I'm an American. It's like I'm black, gay. I'm not gay. Even pointing that out is like fucked up, right? It's like how many people did I offend by just pointing out that I'm not gay?
Not that there's anything wrong with it.
Not there's anything wrong with it. Some of my best friends are gay. But yeah, so like.
Do you want me to describe it? No, please.
But so it's like very kind of like a dogma film. It's me in a bathroom. There's you see me repeated three times.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take this bit of material from the place, and I'm going to involve it in the conversation with other materials, and I'm going to collapse it underneath another material that I've been using, or then butt it up against another material that I'm using. In the case of mirrors, it really comes from an anecdote from graduate school when I would sit with Greg Portis when we talked about this idea of nowness. How would you figure out what now is? How do you make now art? It was like, and it wasn't. We were still trying essentially at that time to just define now, right? Like what was now? And there was this long conversation about defining now. And the anecdote that resulted was that you get up in the morning, and you go to brush your teeth. You're going to leave the house and you fix something on your hair, or something that's on your face, and then you leave, and then 2 minutes later that thing from your hair goes right back, but you still believe you are the last character you saw last time you saw yourself, and that is your now moment, and you are essentially stuck with that moment. This is the only way you can clearly understand exactly what you are to other people is through this last kind of opportunity. So by creating these scenarios where those then become kind of hijacked and brutalized or misshapen, and it kind of allows you to then have like kind of a now moment with the work while experiencing the work. I mean, it can be as simple as an anecdote like that then introduces the material, and then the material goes through the gauntlet of me learning to perform with it, and me learning how to address it and use it, and understanding kind of some of the other concerns that I have around it. But it can be as easy as sitting in a bathhouse. So go to a bathhouse.
Rashid, relative to vocabulary, I'm curious about a symbol that you use over and over in a lot of work, the crosshair. And you just did the edition with Sculpture Center. I think that's the crosshair brand on the rosewood. What does that symbolize to you, the crosshair? I mean, in my mind, it kind of relates to what you were saying about the breakdancing, about the circle, and then engaging into the center. But is there something?
You guys want every fucking thing, don't you?
Fear of the public enemy?
Yeah,
It's kind of Fear of Black. I mean, the way it really came to me was I was listening to Fear of Black Planet.
Yeah.
But there you go. Brother from Another Planet, Fear
of Black.
So there's all these references to divination, alchemy. The materials are chemical materials.
Yeah.
They're materials that start out as through a primary process, change their form.
Right.
Right, so they or a secondary process become permanent. So you cast something, and it becomes it has a longer life than its actual material condition. And so again, this idea of knowledges, right? That knowledges that fall outside of positivist, empiricist science, right? Divination and alchemy are outside of rationality science. And to a certain extent, the metaphysics of that, I think, is something you're interested in. And yoga's an example of that because it's become a bodily practice that's reduced to basically, exercise.
Right.
And it's kind of long spiritual.
It's totally kind of
its
lost.
religiosity is sort of
it's totally hijacks. Yeah, absolutely.
Or the CB radio, the sort of outdated technology that obviously predates the internet, which of course is bodiless. It's
Right.
There is no identity.
But it gives an opportunity for autonomy as well in a different way.
You can construct autonomy while simultaneously being completely virtual. It predates virtual. I mean, it's the era, space.
All right.
I think there was a question in the back.
I wanted to say that I really think what Joao was saying is very interesting, and how it deals with the work. But the thing that's maybe not being talked about is that the work is slightly more vivid than we're saying it is. I mean, these objects that exist on the pieces are glimpses into a conversation that maybe is not able to be known, but Rashid's asking you to ask the question. I mean, if you don't know, you better ask somebody.
Is it a secret conversation?
Secrets.
Well, no, I think that to what you're saying, that the invitation to participate is also really important. We talked a bit about the performance of the artist and Rashid's performance specifically, but in general, the notion of the performance of the artist and the making of the work, the gesture, and so on. But then with the nowness comes the performance of the viewer, and it's a command performance with the work. I mean, we can reject that command if we choose, but I think especially with the works with these objects, I mean, I know we feel kind of invited to touch ourselves with the shea butter, or to flip through the book that says Negrosis, or to listen to the Mingus LP. Right. And so, and
you can't really hear it, man.
You can listen.
But I'm interested in this, and in this kind of the invitation to participate, and having that be this generous gesture, and to kind of are allowing us to construct our own reading of this through our own performance, rather than just through some kind of distance, but collapsing that distance.
I have to add this. We've watched. You have to watch kids interact with this work, as we have over a long period of time. It's interesting how it becomes about themselves. I think work that turns the conversation into the viewer is really, really, really powerful. So I'm sitting here, I'm like talking to myself to some degree. It's like, it's distorted.
This is
but
really fascinating because this was for for 20 years, this was considered the basest form of experience, right? There was an aggressively critiqued notion that the viewers' presence, right, what is called theatricality, this whole idea was considered basically, it's pandering to the lowest form of
Well, I don't know what you call it. When kids
But why is that changed? But why is that changed?
When kids stand in front, we've watched, we get so many kids coming through our space. And the work that, kids just end up having lots to say, and it comes back to them. They somehow identify whether it's the action, or it's the material, or it's the reflection, or it's whatever it is. It's like, it's kind of so adult naughty too. I mean, it's like breaking things, smashing things, doing things. Huh?
Right, is that adult?
That's good too.
But I think it speaks to the strength of the formal and material qualities of your work. That, that someone who doesn't have all these cultural, this body of knowledge about various symbols and formal properties can respond to it. That there's a strength in that in itself. That has nothing to do with all that content that we've been talking a lot about. I mean,
Absolutely.
Kids aren't really worried about ontology, except in
Well, no, but they are though.
Well, no,
A child will the normal or a normative procedure of child development is to divide the world into two categories of objects, right? Children have to acquire, and they create their own form of organizing the world with objects. So often there's two classes of objects in the world. There's ba and blah. And they literally start to differentiate. So they're very concerned with ontology. They don't have a language to express.
Precisely.
Maybe
They are responding to it as a thing, not as a cultural symbol.
Right.
That's wrapped up with all these ideas about blackness, some ontological idea about blackness. Kids don't know anything about that. They're responding to it as a thing.
It's an object on itself.
A visual.
Right.
Yeah.
I think if you ask I would caveat would be if you ask a black child from Cabrini Green, I think they would have maybe very different. I think we tend to lump experience as a kind of normative, baseless, zero-degree experience, and it actually is fundamentally defined by class, and to a certain extent by the impositions of certain class experiences by race. And I think there actually are studies out there that show that what we consider to be a kind of groundless base experience, like, they're just responding on this very intuitive emotional level, that emotionality, the range of emotions that children can respond to is greatly defined by things like their diet, their environment, their outlook on life, which is largely shaped by their experience from birth. Prenatal care is a great effect on children's ability to acquire knowledge. So I think, I don't disagree with you, but I think it's also good to point out that, it's not that art is somehow existing in this wonderful, valueless space where everyone can experience it. I think it's actually okay to say that it's the point where there's the tension that can be interesting.
Right.
And because it's to say things are universal is often to sort of take out what's interesting about them.
Right.
To say, but I think you're right. I think you're fundamentally right that experience can be democratized across generations. But then there's an argument about what does that matter in regards to what the work is trying to do, or to anyone.
I thought very little bit about how kids perform with my work. I have my first child. He can't walk. He's 3 months old. So I guess this may be something that I would address in the next 5 to 10 years. But as of this moment, I don't have any real experience with it, and I couldn't speak to me pandering to them. But if they like it, I'm totally right. That's excellent. That's
But I think you're open to the subjectivity of each individual viewer as they come into contact with the objects that you make.
Absolutely.
You're proposing. You're just like, you're proposing things. This is your statement. You're making your work because this is what you make.
Absolutely.
And you're just ready for that sort of conversation to happen.
I was actually thinking of teenage kids that open up to conversations about drugs, sex, and the kind of violence that they experience in the neighborhoods that we're in. And it's a very powerful catalyst when art can allow, I don't mean like little kids, like,
Right.
I'm talking about where somehow conversation, real important life conversations open up through experiencing the artwork.
Right.
The work becomes a catalyst for significant, like, look, you were referencing books. These kids may not be referenced, books are one reference, but to stand in front of a work where they're prepared to open up about some condition which now pulls them into a community and conversation with other, when I say kids, I mean, I'm talking about teenagers that are,
Right.
in tough conditions.
Right.
And it opens them up to conversation, which is really, it can have a huge effect on
It's
one's
amazing.
life.
Thank you all.